This is a special episode. It was recorded live in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest EDU. I had three guests with me. They were Riddhima Mishra, Research Director of Learning Collider, Edith Yang, a Senior Associate at MDRC, and Debbie Wasden, a Senior Vice President with the Burning Glass Institute. The goal here was trying to figure out how we can use AI to benefit learners and workers. All three of my expert guests come at this question from some different angles, but I think we found some through lines of really what to watch and how to make sure learners and workers aren't being left behind in the AI wave. Welcome to The Cusp, a podcast that tries to give you the straight dope on what's actually happening with artificial intelligence, how jobs are changing, and what that means for education and workforce development. I'm Paul Fain, editor of the Job Newsletter and co-founder of WorkShift. Thanks for listening. Hello, welcome to Austin. Hello, South by Southwest EDU. How you doing? Woohoo! That was good. So I'm dating myself. I've been covering higher education and things thereabouts for over 2 decades. And I have to say there's only 3 knock over my chair moments as a journalist. And that's a literal thing. In 2007, when the market collapsed and Lehman Brothers shut down, I stood up at the Chronicle of Higher Education and knocked over my chair. I'd seen that the market was down like 700 points. And you didn't have to be smart to know, like, this is big. University endowments collapsed, everything changed, to the pace of coverage, everything. And it meant like my beat, I had to tear up and start over again. The second time, as you all may remember, something happened at the beginning of 2020. And, I was at Inside Higher Ed then, and we had access to infectious disease experts at places like the University of Washington and Princeton who said, hey, buckle up. This is going to be way worse than you even think. And I remember talking to a community college president in my hometown of Dayton, Ohio, Sinclair College. Yes, there we go. Ohio is in the house. Woohoo! Steve Johnson. And it was my last time out at a restaurant for a very long time. I met him in DC, and he said they had formed a war room. Everything was going to change. Absolutely everything. So we tore up our website at Inside Higher Ed, and everything was COVID for a very long time. I think this is one of those moments. It's different in a lot of ways. But I think, people who know things tell me they are bullish that we are on the cusp of big change. And what it is ain't exactly clear, but something is coming, something big, something soon that's going to affect probably all of us in many ways. So that is our topic today. But before we really get into the nitty gritty, I want to ask panelists, do you use AI tools? And if so, which ones? Edith, do you want to?
I have been experimenting with ChatGPT, and it has helped me greatly in just being able to write out bullet points and just helping me to be more productive in my kind of writing and presentations.
Okay, so Edith Yang works on economic mobility, housing, and communities at MDRC. And next to her is Riddhima Mishra, the Research Director for Learning Collider. Riddhima, which tools do you use?
I will say ChatGPT. Personally, I had to ask 9 people for a recommendation letter, and a lot of them wanted to make sure that their life is easy. So I offered them to write and then asked them to review it and edit it as they see fit. But what that meant for me was to write 9 recommendation letters, drafts of it, and to also make them sound in 9 different voices, which is not humanly possible. So I was using ChatGPT a lot for that. I was asking it to change it. So that's one piece. I've also used it a couple of times to code. So the times where I knew the code, but I wasn't completely sure if I've written it completely correctly. So use that help.
Great. Thank you for that. So next to Riddhima is Debbie Wasden, Senior Vice President for Solutions at the Burning Glass Institute. Debbie, what AI tools do you use?
Also ChatGPT. In areas like helping to write an email first draft that I can then edit, sort of going from 0 to 1 on some of the agenda writing or an email about an event or those kind of things.
Sure. So Debbie, I want to stay with you to kind of set the landscape. BGI has access to a lot of data about jobs and what's happening, skills needed for jobs. Can you briefly give us a sense of what you're seeing now?
Sure. So Burning Glass Institute is an organization that advances data-driven research and practice at the intersection of the future of work and the future of workers. On this topic, I'd like to start with thinking about where we were when ATMs first arrived about 40 years ago. And history may not repeat itself, but there is a rhythm and patterns. And that notion that AI is going to completely decimate or totally create or transform jobs tomorrow is in some ways akin to that ATM example. It was believed at the time that they would destroy the banking industry. In reality, AI, like other technology, will reshape how human capacity can be used for more productive, higher level uses. But ATMs let customers perform transactions without human assistance, yet tellers didn't disappear. Their role instead evolved to focus on more complex customer service tasks. So as we're going to talk about AI impacting the workforce, I really think we should focus on and zone in on the how. In some cases, it'll automate jobs away, but in most cases, it will make people do their work that they're already doing better. The going away feels really scary. The making it better and more productive feels exciting. But the truth is, we're still learning about where that line is, and it's probably a mix of the two. We estimate that about 80% of the US workers could have about 10% of their tasks impacted by AI, while 19% of US workers could have 50% of their tasks impacted by generative AI. This means that a majority of workers will need to learn new skills and adapt to the evolving technology and tools that will be necessary for their shifting roles, while a much smaller percentage of the population will have a much larger disruption due to AI. AI will be uneven in how it affects industries. So certain sectors where technology use is low and work is more physical in nature are likely to see less impact of AI-based disruption. So sectors like transportation, construction, manufacturing, retail are more in the low category. Sectors such as advanced manufacturing, wholesale, healthcare are more in the mid. And we anticipate sectors like publishing, finance, data processing, legal services to be in the high. But generative AI impact is less about automating jobs than it is about augmentation and transforming them.
So I want to bring Riddhima in here. Riddhima, I know your research looks at a broad swath. What are you most excited about, particularly maybe in K-12? What's possible?
Yeah, I think particularly I'm very excited about the personalization piece that is coming with AI. So for instance, we know research has shown that high dosage tutoring has a huge impact on students' learning outcome. But to scale it's a challenge. It's a costly affair to hire tutors, to train them, and also to manage them. With the given technology, we're seeing that you can provide that customized solution to students where they can ask questions and they can get a response. So that's what is possible now. Researchers are now thinking, how can you actually model how the brain learns, similar to the computational models that were developed for human vision. So if you come to think about it, there would be a world where we're not only looking at when a student made a mistake, but we're also able to unearth what the reasons behind making that error. Like, is it something that the student is not understanding something conceptually? Or is it, let's say, an error that happened because, let's say, they were careless? Or there are things beyond, like psychologically, they're stressed, so that is kind of impeding them to finish their curriculum, and accordingly then provide them that support. And having said that, I don't want to make it sound like this will do away with human tutors completely, because there is an aspect that humans are good at. But we're talking about this high dosage tutoring where instead of providing it 100%, we can achieve it, let's say 70 to 80% with the help of AI. And what I'm really excited about combining this personalization tool is the ability to think beyond that. As the future of work would change, new skills would emerge, we can combine them catering to specific learners. So that's a piece I'm really excited about.
Thank you for that. We'll drill into that a little bit. Edith, I know you've looked at a wide range of the impacts here. kind of the efficiency possibilities for organizations is one. Do you want to start there with what you're watching?
Sure. So I work at MDRC Center for Data Insights. And at the center, we work with organizations to leverage their data to better help their learners achieve better outcomes. So at the center, we work with a lot of really thoughtful training providers who are really thinking deeply about how they can better provide personalized individual services to people who may need the most intensive services to be able to succeed. And so we're really excited about the potential of AI to facilitate that. So we at the center have built an AI-driven predictive analytics tool that kind of takes organizations through a journey of predictive analytics and helps them to really assess, what data are we collecting, what questions are we trying to answer that can help us to improve our services to the people that we really care about and to the people that, may need more than employment-related services to get them to that next level of economic mobility.
Quickly on that, predictive analytics, I've been coming to South by Southwest for a long time. We wrote a lot about some very exciting developments in predictive analytics and the possibilities for higher education 10 years ago that fizzled. Very little, I believe, actually happened. I think there were some benefits. There's still some companies doing interesting stuff, but I think in AI, there are a lot of people out there who say, I've seen this movie before. Like, we're in the hype cycle phase. The trough of disillusionment is coming. For predictive analytics, does this change possibility in ways that are really big? Because I feel like maybe it does.
I think there's potential. I don't think we know quite yet. I also think that, like within a technology, we're not convinced that predictive analytics has gotten a sufficient test in higher ed. My work has mostly been with workforce development, and we think with any technology, it takes a lot of iteration. It takes a lot of knowing, the on-the-ground staff knowing what is actually happening with the learners that they're working with and informing whether these tools are working and continuing to refine those tools so that they find a model that can work for their particular learners.
So, Debbie, I feel like the most important piece of information, if you're running an education or training program right now, is how is AI going to change the jobs I'm preparing people for? And BGI is in a good place for that. I have to tell you, like bank tellers, I would be concerned if I was a bank teller right now. I would be concerned about my job viability, but even changes to it that I might not be prepared for. Like, how close are we to being able to really know? If you're in a position of training folks for those jobs, do you know what's coming in the next 18 months?
The way that it's being measured is by exposure right now. And I think the risk of looking at exposure to automation is that if you think about taking the term exposure and thinking about it like, how did I get a sunburn? We don't know how it's going to actually impact these jobs. As you said before, we've seen similar stories to this, but we haven't seen this disruption. What we are seeing today is that there are roles that are going to be impacted by the need to use new tools. And those new tools and that augmentation, whether it's 10% or 20%, are going to have some data-driven connections to data usage, and some of the conversations we had previously on data science and analytics and digital literacy come into play in here. But people are going to have new skills in their jobs as bank tellers. We have a high degree of confidence on that. We also have a high degree of confidence that in roles that in many cases are the highest paying, like management and consulting services, are going to be transformed, but we do not expect them to go away. So in the most white-collar, high-paying, data-driven roles, we're seeing enormous growth and a need for those roles to transform and the people with them to transform. on your question before on will we actually see change in education and learning? I think we will, because people are going to need to be reskilled and upskilled. There are going to be transformative jobs that are still in development, but the majority of what's going to happen is that people are going to have to learn new skills, and they're going to hopefully learn them as part of their K-12 education in terms of knowing data, basic digital and data science skills and tool engagement. And then as they progress into their careers, they get into more of an applied space.
I saw one of the leads of Accenture's AI division speak recently. By the way, they have 80,000 people working on AI, and they're spending $3 billion this year to tool up their proficiency there. And he said, you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by someone who uses it better than you. I like that framing. Riddhima, you look like you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I would say that what Debbie is saying is completely true. And I think earlier there was like a lot of emphasis on, let's say, to code. But now I believe like anything that has a structure and a logic, AI is able to replicate it. And in terms of the skills that's going to be more relevant would be what we call the soft skills or the durable skills. And to what you're saying, that somebody who is able to better use those tools. We really need people who can critically think. Like, it's no longer important that can you code or can't code. For instance, like, do you know where you have to code or in like what way?
Let's stick there for a second. I mean, I think I'm familiar with that in theory, of that idea that like we're going to have to slide the human part, adjust to where the human part of education is now. But specifically, I am not clear on what that means. And I think, under-resourced K-12 districts, having spoken to a couple of them who even asked me to talk to them about what to do, there are not a lot of answers that I'm hearing right now. And like, if you're making decisions about a curriculum for a K-12 district, where do you turn?
To be honest, it's a difficult question. Like, I don't have an answer to it. But to your question of like understanding how to implement a curriculum which is designed around the skills of the future, I would say like if I don't know exactly how you're going to go about implementing it, but if you were to think about like how AI can support even that question. So there's this company called International Society of Technology in Education who are building this AI tool to bridge the gap between education, research, and practice. So you can think about those kind of tools which are able to answer questions like that. But the big question is, if the research is already not there, it's difficult to get an answer. So I do think like there is a dearth of understanding that, like what would that curriculum would look like to begin with. And then I think like the important piece here is also, it's very difficult to measure soft skills. How could you differentiate that my leadership skills is better than Edith or Debbie? And then how do you give feedback to students? So that's also a piece. It's a world unknown, but I'm pretty sure like there's a lot of people working on it, like David Deming at the Harvard University, who started talking about and who's been talking about the soft skills and how do you measure it.
Edith, I'd like to bring you in here. Particularly, I know you've worked on the sector-based training programs, the Year Ups, the Perscholas, and, programs that are focused on helping low-income folks move into the next level of mobility. Does AI open up possibilities for researching what works there?
Yes, it does for sure. And so a lot of the sector-based training programs that we have worked with are looking for solutions to scale, to replicate their services effectively and affordably. And so I think AI can really give guidance and facilitate a lot of that scaling and replicability. One example is we are working with a training partner right now who has adjusted their training program to specifically serve people who are returning home from prisons. And this population, they have much more support needs coming into the program. The sector training program has, a standard program model with program phases that you go through to, develop job development skills, some of the soft skills that Riddhima was talking about, some hard skills in the specific sector that they're looking at, as well as, kind of retention and post-program services. And so people coming into these programs may not go through the program in the expected time frame or even in the expected order that a lot of these training programs are kind of initially set up to do. And so how can we better support people who really could use the help, of these really strong providers to make it to a family sustaining career that they might need. And I think that the use of predictive analytics, the use of AI can really help to have programs zero in on like, what can John Smith, who has completed 2 of these 5 milestones for the program, what is the next thing that he needs to do to succeed in meeting that 3rd milestone? So I think that's where AI can come in and answer those questions.
Sure. Debbie, I'm going to get to you a second here. I spoke with Joe Fuller at Harvard's Project on Workforce recently. He's fantastic if you don't know his work. He's pretty clear-eyed about the progress we've made on skills-based hiring. I'm sure you've all heard there's a lot of activity and excitement around it. Has it actually happened at scale? Have people moved away from the degree as a proxy and started to measure discrete skills in hiring? No, not really. But Joe still thinks they are going to, and he thinks AI is going to enable a lot of that, which is an interesting kind of marrying of these two issues. Debbie, what do you see as the implications now for chief hiring officers about what's possible, where the gaps are, particularly around skills-based hiring?
Thanks for bringing in the skills-based hiring question. It's really important. Joe's a great partner. We just recently released a really important piece of work on skills-based hiring that you're referencing. Good intentions need to be followed up with the infrastructure to make good on those intentions. And what we did when there's many companies that have proclaimed the desire to move to a skills-based approach. And by that, they mean moving away from acquiring degrees unless degrees are necessary. And what we found from our research is that good intention didn't include the infrastructure internally to the company to be able to assess somebody based on their skills. And what that meant is, in fact, the research showed that in many times when the companies removed the degree requirements, they actually either hired more people with degrees for those same roles, or in the vast majority of the time stayed the same. And where AI can kind of come into place in this, and then more broadly, is that, first of all, it's really important that CHROs are very proactive on this. They want to move to a more equitable and skills-based approach, but don't necessarily know how. They are very worried about the impact of AI. And if you don't think the BRT Fortune 500 companies are working on impact of automation and augmentation and transformation, every single one of them is working on it. And our recommendations for them, just really quickly, is that, first of all, to understand and evaluate what their organization's composition is, meaning what are the roles within them? What are the jobs underneath those roles that have different levels of exposure? How do those exposure rates align to what their growth strategies are and where are they headed over those years? And then start to align that to their own talent pipeline of where are they in terms of recruitment, their own trainings, and how does that connect in from the gap that's going to be created between when they know jobs are being changed, there's a sense of what they're going to be changed to. There's a sense now of, I now know what training I'm going to need to upskill my existing workforce. So it's being very intentional and proactive about segmenting their workforce, and then underneath those segments, being able to evaluate how they can very effectively today, and then on an ongoing basis, match that to the emergence of new training.
Well, I want to piggyback on that for a second. We have just begun at WorkShift, the publication I help run, to really dig into specific professions where we know there's going to be change, where we're hearing from big companies there's going to be change. Are there channels to translate that to training providers and community colleges? Because if there are, I haven't seen them yet, but where would you expect to see that conversation occurring?
Associations and employer intermediaries are a good place to start. The research organizations, we're trying to be able to build out methodologies that others can use. We're then enabling and working with associations, nonprofits, and intermediaries to be able to leverage data in new ways, to have different conversations with their companies. The information sharing with companies right now is one way, in the sense that it's very sensitive. But where you're seeing one-to-many start to take place is both in the associations with business associations or sector-based associations, and then in the higher ed community conversations where they're trying to bring in the employer voice. It's still very disparate and ad hoc.
State governments play a role here. I mean, I'm thinking about Alabama with its talent triad, Arkansas's big strategy on workforce just dropped last week. I mean, it seems like some states are trying to help facilitate those conversations.
Absolutely. So the states, there are leading states that are connecting AI transformation, job quality and quality jobs, quality employers, and quality credentials into the same conversations. That gets connected into state data systems and all these kind of learning and employment records and all these kind of big topics. But the states are trying to have these facilitated discussions. On the topic of AI, it's still very nascent as the states are trying to convene and bring out approaches for the companies so that they can learn and see what's happening to reflect that to workers. But I think it's more they're trying to convene, learn, and facilitate at this
Sure.
point.
Thank you for that. Riddhima, I've got a question for you. All these topics on AI could be very long panels in themselves. But the question of equity and fairness, I know you've worked on equitable tech. I wonder, what do you see? I think people, when they see technology that will have a real benefit for students if they're exposed to it early, I think there are a lot of us who are concerned about lower income students having access to the experiences that will help them prepare for this new future of work. But there's also opportunities. Can you lay that out a little bit?
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of potential and specifically around fairness, we know, for example, that there are instances where human decision making can be biased, but there's no good way to flag it. And if you can't flag it, you can't address it, right? I think in that aspect, if you think about fairness, if you're building an algorithm, you can always test it to see if it's flagging some group of students more than the other and having everything else being constant. So if you can flag it, you can address it. Second, I would say is the scale piece. And I'll go back to my previous example where we're talking about high dosage tutoring and then the support that you can provide to students. And a lot of these things gets back to the AI and in terms of scale, how many people can you reach? As much as there is excitement about it, I totally agree with you about the fact that accessibility is an issue. We're still talking about many parts in the US where students don't have access to internet and laptop. And this is something that's been around for a while now. It's not a new tech. Internet has been, it's been years now, internet being around. And we're still talking about population not having access to it. And that's a conversation that we're having in the US, which is one of the richest countries in the world. If you go outside of US, and for example, I come from India, so in my free time, I work with some college students around their career counseling, and I was giving them feedback on their resume. And for this one person, I asked her, I've given you this feedback, and I've noted that you were able to implement 3, but what about these 2? And she told me that I'm editing this resume in my phone. And I asked her, what about your laptop or computer? And then she said, I don't have one.
Sure. Thank you. Edith, you have done research on equity in labor markets. There's a lot here, but I wonder if there are any kind of key questions you'd like to see folks work on, things you're going to be watching the next few years to really research the impacts of the technology.
Yeah, I think one of the big questions is, can AI help us, predict outcomes equitably and ethically? Right. And so I think the same partner who was expanding their services to people who were coming out of prisons, I think in a lot of ways, you can imagine someone coming out of a prison who is just returning home and who has had their data systematically used against them up to this point in their life, for them to then be connected to a training provider who is asking them, tell me your background information so I can help you get better services. It takes a lot of time, right, for that kind of trust and relationship to be built for that learner to then be able to, trust that the information they're giving the provider is going to be kept safe, secure, confidential, and also not going to be used to further harm them. And so I think that, as we're thinking about where AI can help, there's also kind of this, bi-directional. Workforce training providers are probably the best poised to be able to help us think about how to be culturally responsive in collecting the essential data elements that we need from people who are missing from a lot of these data systems that we need to use to build these AI models.
Sure. I feel like these topics are very difficult to find folks who actually know things. Preconceived notions about what's possible, particularly, again, with the impact on lower wage Americans.
I have two. The first is that there's going to be a tool that's going to have a unicorn effect, and it will magically fix all the issues in education and workforce and allow everybody to live prosperously, or on the other side is going to be the end of the world, right?
Right.
I think there's an overemphasis on the tools versus what this is actually, the implication of what this is going to mean for people, for the economy, for work, for workers. So the over-indexing of the tool versus thinking more broadly. And then the other is that we have seen other emerging fields, and I've referenced a couple of them. I think there is a desire to either only talk about tools and literacy or talk about PhD experts creating the models. And there is a lack of understanding of what that looks like in the middle and how we approach and enable in that augmentation space. And I think that's where, if folks can lean in on the augmentation space, what does it mean to change your job slightly? And what will that mean for the learning ecosystem? That's a win for everybody if we can figure out that middle space more intentionally.
I really like the way you frame that, as somebody who exists in the middle space. I feel like the media coverage, and I'm part of the media, so I deserve a little bit of the blame here, but it's been very much like the super low stakes, like, oh, cheating, not that we don't care about cheating, but like when it comes to AI, I don't think that's the biggest issue, or like the kind of tech bro, end of the world, robo apocalypse. You see a lot of that too, but like actual thing for actual people in the near term, we don't see as much. Edith, myths, preconceived notions you don't like that you hear a lot, anything come to mind?
Yeah, I don't think this is new information from what my panelists have just said, but I like to think of AI as a way for frontline workers at organizations to enhance their jobs and do their jobs a little bit better. It's not going to replace the relationship that the frontline social worker has with a learner. It's not going to replace their encouragement and their empathy. It can only help them to make the information they have on that person a little more efficient and help them to connect the person to the next step that they need, or the next organization they need to reach out to be able to, overcome that next milestone in that program journey.
I don't need to tell you that work to improve the economic mobility of low-income Americans is really tough. Because of all the things you said about the social capital, there's so many things baked into the system to preserve the privilege of higher wage folks. Are you optimistic, speaking in a very large sense here, that AI can actually help folks with breaking through some of the licensing barriers and getting some of the skills augmented to help, as opposed to help folks just preserve their position in higher wage jobs? Where are you on the optimism, pessimism scale there?
I think I'm hopeful. And I'm thinking about a personal anecdote from, 10 years ago. So I am a domestic violence survivor. And 10 years ago, I found myself navigating the support systems in New York City, the legal systems in New York City. And I got connected to a wonderful social worker who came with me to my court appointments, who listened to me, who validated my feelings, who gave me perspectives that I could then move on to. And, I think that if AI had been around there, then her job could have been a lot easier. Her time burdens with paperwork, with really researching like what types of services that I, as an Asian female coming from a more privileged background, but may have not had complete financial control of everything, AI could have helped her to more efficiently direct me to the services that I needed.
Thank you very much for sharing. So the name of the podcast is The Cusp. I'd like to get some sense. I usually try to avoid predictions in my journalism or in panels, but I'd like to get a sense of how long are we going to wait to the cusp of something here? How long until you anticipate really big changes to jobs that have repercussions for education and training? I have to tell you, I ask this question a lot. I hear, for folks who think there will be changes, anything from 18 months to 3 years to 5 years, even 10. I heard 10 here yesterday, which is, it's a long cusp if that's what we're looking at. Debbie, what do you think?
I think that if you redefine that as the pervasive utilization of tools that are using AI, I think we have months, not years. I think the disruption of jobs is in the 1 to 3 years. And I think by 5 years, you can't remember a day where this wasn't part of your daily life.
Thanks for taking that on first, especially. Riddhima?
I would agree with Debbie. I think the main thing is how quickly you see these tools being implemented in the workforce. And the quicker they are, I think we're starting to see that companies are not wanting to hire people for certain types of jobs. I don't have a specific timeline because I feel like if you really start looking into it and if you start thinking about companies who would be the first mover to implement these tools, you would have the big companies probably doing it. But then there would be some who, even if they want to, they're not implementing. So yeah, it's a matter of the cost, how soon this technology would be cheap, how many people are going to implement it in the workforce to have a timeline. So I don't know.
You can punt.
Yeah.
But sooner than later, right?
Sooner than later, for sure.
I also rely on Debbie's expertise as far as how long this will take. I did have a few fast facts that I wrote down, and one of them is that lower income workers are 14 times more likely to need to change their occupations than some higher income workers. And so I think that's going to be coming up. That's imminent.
Alrighty, so we're going to wrap it here. I want to thank the GitLab Foundation once again for making this possible. South by Southwest EDU, Mike Palmer from Palmer Media, my podcast producer. Look for The Cusp. It's coming soon. But most of all, thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into The Cusp. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe. You can visit us at thecusp.ai. The launch of this podcast was made possible by the collective philanthropic support of the Walmart Foundation, GitLab Foundation, Cognizant, and the Kapor Center. Thanks to our supporters and to you all for listening. Catch you next time.